Do we have evidence tampering or do we just have incompetence? Because I don't understand how we have two sealed bags of evidence and two shoes being at the scene when they already said multiple times that there is only one shoe at the scene. Day 12 of Karen Read's trial has wrapped up and we only heard from one witness today. So let's talk about what happened. Hi, my name is Sydney Rushing. I'm a criminal defense attorney in the state of Michigan. Now let's talk about it. The prosecutors called witness number 24, Sergeant Buchanan, to the stand. Now he's with the Massachusetts State Police and was Proctor's partner. Which really sucks for him when it comes to this case. During direct examination by Brennan, we learned that he interviewed Jen McCabe, Matt McCabe, and Brian Albert with his partner, Proctor. He went to the hospital to see John because he wanted to see the injuries for himself. He wanted to see the location, the type, the extent, and pretty much just the overall condition of John's body because he felt that that could be very telling. After making his observations, he took his clothes to take them into evidence, and at this time, he noticed he only had on one shoe. A shoe, I might add, caused quite the scene later on in today's testimony. His take on the case at this point became that it was a vehicle hit and that essentially he was hit so hard that he was kicked out of his shoes. But it's really one shoe. So, he was hit so hard only one shoe came off, not both. He and his partner, Proctor, decided that they wanted to go talk with Karen because they determined that she was the last one to see him alive. Along this same mindset, initially thinking that John, was hit by a car, he wanted to see Karen's car for himself. And of course, when they pulled up at her parents' house, she was missing a big chunk of her taillight. He then went on to discuss that Karen agreed to talk to them, which prompted Judge Cannoni to step in and instruct the jury that before they can consider Karen's statements as evidence, they have to determine that the prosecution has proved beyond a reasonable doubt that her statements were voluntary. He said that Read told them that they were at the waterfall, and then after that, she dropped him off at 34 Fairview, and that she didn't see him go in the house. Also asked her about the injuries on the back of John's head, to which she said she didn't see any injuries, and then followed up with that he hit his head 2 days prior. After their conversation with Karen concluded, they seized her cell phone and her vehicle, and then we got the shock of the day. Because, these are pretty much coming up daily now at this point. When asked to open and present a shoe that John was wearing at the hospital that morning, he opened the bag, looked at the label, seemed confused, and pulled the shoe out and said that this is the right shoe that was located at 34 Fairview. But what's funny about that was yesterday, Keith showed a shoe, the left shoe, that was found at 34 Fairview. So now we have two shoes that were located at Fairview when we know only one was recovered there. This is a sealed bag, a marked bag. So what does this show us? This could be in the form of incompetence and mislabeling, but the thing is how do you do that when this is the second trial? So these shoes have already been presented before, so how could the bags be mixed up like that? They should have just been resealed and taken back to the evidence locker. This is a little bit problematic. Shows potential manipulation of evidence. And even if it's not that, there's still doubt and a possibility that it could be that. So this really hurts the prosecution and it kills this witness's credibility. And how did Brennan not realize that sooner? How did they not realize that both of these bags said the same thing? That's crazy. Obviously, a break was called by Cannoni, and then after the break, he testified that this is the shoe that he recovered from the hospital and not from the scene, which is what the bag had labeled it as. Then, after that, we had the text between him and Proctor make their appearance. Ones where Proctor was saying, "Honey, I'm going through his retarded client's phone now, and no nudes so far. I hate that man. I really hate that man." And it's clear that Buchanan does not want to read these text messages out loud. He was very uncomfortable. Then we had some surveillance that was shown of McCarthy's where John and Karen were at, and Karen was adding, shots to her mixed drinks, and they broke for lunch, and the jury probably wishing they could have a drink. During the break, Cannoni ruled that the media cannot record or give the names of John's underage niece and nephew, and this makes perfect sense. I'm a big fan of protecting anyone who's underage's identities, their testimony, and things like that. Then after lunch, Brennan presented surveillance video of the Waterfall Bar and Grill. And then Action Jackson came with the cross, and it's clear he's feeling much better. He obviously knew that this was going to be a heated and uncomfortable exchange during this entire cross-examination. When asked, Buchanan said that the investigation was handled with honor and integrity. Now, we got stuck here for a minute because it was clear Buchanan did not want to answer Jackson's next question, which was, did Trooper Proctor handle this case with honor and integrity? And Buchanan just kept going and saying, the investigation was handled, with honor and integrity. But he's asking specifically about Trooper Proctor, and we obviously know why, and Buchanan does not want to give an answer on that. This could be for a few reasons. One, he didn't want to have to lie on the stand by saying yes, it was done when he knows it wasn't. Or two, he didn't want to make the investigation look bad, which is what would happen if he said that it wasn't handled that way, with Proctor being the lead investigator on the case. He finally ended it with just basically saying that Proctor handled the case with integrity. There was no honor mentioned. When he was asked about the investigation that was in the early stages of that morning, he was asked if he called the medical examiner's office and said something along the lines of that there was a possibility that John was hit in the face with a cocktail glass. And he said, yes, that sounds about right. And then he also agreed that there was a possibility that John was involved in an altercation. Then he was asked about Jen, Matt, and Brian Albert and whether they could have been lying to investigators since the beginning of the case. He was asked if he basically took them at their word, during those first few interviews, and he said, no, that was not correct. However, he did not search 34 Fairview, nor did he get a search warrant, nor did he ask them to come down to the station. And he also interviewed Jen at her house, and just so happened that Brian Albert was also there. Don't forget, he's a Boston cop. Then Judge Cannoni dismissed the jurors for the day, and we will continue cross-examination of Buchanan tomorrow morning. I'm sure Buchanan was more than ready to get off the stand because he looked so nervous and, stressed and truly uncomfortable testifying today. Which he kind of should be, because now all the heat is on him since we haven't heard from Proctor. And that's your recap for day 12 of Karen Read's trial. Thanks for following along. Thanks for being here. And my question of the day is, if you were on the jury and you saw this whole mix up with the shoe, do you think that causes an issue, or do you think that it's not a big deal at all? Let me know what you think in the comments.